Forge gang! I'm still a hard man! Let's go! Alright, so finally, made it to ancient Greece. So this is Imperator Forge. I will be talking about life in ancient Greece. And I hope you enjoy it. And you know what? I might not be able to do the reading sample. I'm going to go ahead and cut the Plato's Timaeus. So anyways, let's just get into it. Life in ancient Greece. Life in ancient Greece. Wow. Certainly a lot better than call-in advice show. Could you imagine like doing a call-in show for free advice? And think that that would be interesting to watch. For real, man, for real. I mean, I don't know. It's Twitch. What do you expect? Life in Ancient Greece by Tim Lambert. Cities in ancient Greece. Ancient Greek cities were protected by stone walls. Inside them, most of the land was occupied by private homes. However, there were also many temples and workshops. In a typical workshop, a craftsman worked with one or two assistants and perhaps a slave. Methods of government varied among the Greek policies. However, Athens is famous for its democracy. In Athens, there was a council made up of 500 men. They proposed new laws which were debated in an assembly, which all men could attend, held every 10 days. The Athenians also had a method of removing politicians they disliked. At an assembly, each year men voted the name of the unpopular politician on pieces of broken pottery. If 600 men voted against him, he was banished for 10 years. This practice gave us the word ostracize. The ancient Greeks also founded many colonies in the Mediterranean between 750 BC and 500 BC. The Greeks founded colonies in southern Italy and southern France. They also founded colonies in Cyrenaica. They also began colonies on the Anatolian coast, modern Turkish coast, around the Black Sea, and on the coast of North Africa. Society in ancient Greece. Like all early civilizations, ancient Greece was an agrarian society. Most of the people lived by farming, and the main form of wealth was owning land. In each city, there was an upper class and a middle class of men, like substantial farmers, doctors, and teachers. However, the vast majority of people were peasants and craftsmen or slaves. slavery was common. It is estimated that about 30% of the population of Athens was made up of slaves. If they worked in rich people's homes, slaves could be reasonably treated. However, by law, owners were allowed to flog slaves. Those slaves who worked in mines probably suffered the most. Prisoners of war were made slaves. Furthermore, any child born to a slave was automatically a slave. However, there were also a huge number of slaves imported from abroad. Slaves were cheap, and only the poorest Greeks could not afford them. Even if they were not slaves, most of the people in ancient Greece had a very low standard of living. Despite all the achievements of ancient Greece, for most of its people, life was very hard. When a child was born, it was not regarded as a person until it was 5 days old, when a special ceremony was held and the child became part of the family. Parents were entitled by law to abandon newborn babies to die of exposure. Sometimes strangers would adopt abandoned babies. However, in that case, the baby became a slave. The Greeks worshipped goddesses as well as gods. Women participated in religious festivals. However, in a wealthy family, women usually stayed apart from men. They usually stayed in the back or upper part of the house. In a rich family, the wife was expected to run the home and very often manage the finances. However, rich women would normally stay indoors and send slaves to do the shopping. Poor women, of course, had no choice. They might also have to help their husbands with farm work. Women, even rich ones, were expected to spin and weave cloth and make clothes. However, in Sparta, women owned much of the land. We also know from records that women owned land in Thessaly, and the Cretan city-state of Gortyn. In ancient Greece, some women were tavern keepers. Others sold food or perfume. Some were wool workers. In ancient Greece, some girls were taught to read or write. Women from wealthy families were often well educated. Girls married when they were about 15, except in Sparta, where they were typically older. Marriages were often arranged. Greek women were not allowed to participate in the Olympic Games. However, women had their own games dedicated to the goddess Hera, wife of Zeus. The Heraean Games were held once every 4 years. There were many great women in ancient Greece. Sappho, 6th century BC, was a famous Greek woman poet. Thenio of Crotona, born 546 BC, was a famous mathematician. Telesilla of Argos was a famous poet who lived around 500 BC. Gorgo, queen of Sparta, born 508 BC, was an influential woman. About 400 BC, Arete of Cyrene, About 400 BC, Arete of Cyrene was a famous philosopher. Timica of Sparta was a philosopher about 375 BC. Hipparchia of Meronia 580, 550 to 280 BC was a philosopher. Anyete of Tegea was a great poet who lived around 250 BC. About 150 BC, Aglionike was a woman astronomer. So women were very much looked down upon in ancient Greek society, but there were a relative few who were noted philosophers. The Olympic Games. Athletic competitions were held during religious festivals in every Greek city. However, the Olympic Games began in Olympia in 776 BC in honor of Zeus, the chief patron god. The chief god and people who came from all over Greece and the Greek colonies to take part in them. Wars stopped to allow everyone to take part in the Hellenic world. Athletes competed in boxing, wrestling, running, horse racing, chariot racing, and the pentathlon. 5 athletic events. Winners were not given medals like the modern Olympics. Instead, they were given a crown of leaves. Houses in ancient Greece. Ancient Greek homes were usually plain and simple. They were made of mud bricks covered in plaster. Roofs were made of pottery tiles. Windows did not have glass and were just holes in the wall. Poor people lived in just 1, 2, or 3 rooms. Rich Greeks lived in large houses with several rooms. Usually they were arranged around a courtyard and often had an upper story. Downstairs was the kitchen and the dining room called the andron. So was the living room. Upstairs were bedrooms and a room for women called a gynoecium. The women wove cloth there. The woman wove cloth there and also ate their meals there away from the men. Furniture was basic even in a rich home. The ancient Greeks stored things in wooden chests or hung them from wooden pegs on the walls. A rich home would also have a dresser to display expensive cups. People reclined on couches, which could also act as beds. The couches were simply wooden frames with rope webbing. And mats or rugs laid on top. Poor people rose at sunrise and went to bed at dusk, but the rich lit their homes with olive oil lamps. Am I coming in clearly or what? Food in ancient Greece. Ordinary Greeks lived on a staple diet of bread made from barley, or, if you could afford it, wheat, and goat's cheese. The meat was a luxury, but fish and vegetables were plentiful. Ordinary Greeks ate pulses, onions, garlic, and olives. They also ate hens' eggs. Peasants caught small birds to eat. The Greeks also ate fruits such as raisins, apricots, figs, apples, pears, and pomegranates. Rich Greeks ate much more varied and interesting diets, such as roasted hare, peacock eggs, or iris bulbs in vinegar. Poor people drank mainly water. If they could afford it, they added honey to sweeten it. Wine was also a popular drink. Usually the wine was drunk diluted with water. Clothes in ancient Greece. Ordinary ancient Greek women wore a peplos. It was a rectangle of cloth folded and pinned together. It was tied at the waist. Later, Greek women began to wear a long tunic called a cheton. A cheton. Women also wore cloaks called himishins. Women wore jewelry like necklaces, bracelets, and anklets. Rich women carried parasols to protect themselves from the sun. Women did not cut their hair unless they were mourning. It was worn in many different styles. And so this kind of gives you an idea of what a woman in ancient Greece would have dressed like. They would have worn this over their head to protect them from the sun. Men wore plain tunics of wool tied at the waist. Men also wore cloaks called himishins, and if they were traveling, they wore broad-rimmed hats. Although ordinary Greeks wore clothes of wool or linen, the rich could afford cotton and silk. Most Greeks washed in a basin called a loterion, though the rich sometimes had bathrooms. People rubbed themselves with olive oil and then rubbed it off with a tool called a strigil or a stragil. The Romans also used stragils. Education in ancient Greece. In ancient Greece, girls were taught by their mothers. They learned skills like weaving. Many girls also learned to read and write at home. Boys from better off families started school when they were 7. Boys from rich families were escorted to school by a slave. The boys learned reading, writing, and arithmetic, as well as poetry and music. The Greeks also believed that physical education was very important, so boys did dancing and athletics. Discipline was severe and children were often beaten. In Sparta, children were treated very harshly. At the age of 7, boys were removed from their families and sent to live in barracks. They were treated severely to turn them into brave soldiers. They were deliberately kept short of food so they would have to steal, teaching them stealth and cunning. They were whipped for any offense. Spartan girls learned athletics and dancing, so they would become fit and healthy mothers of more soldiers. In ancient Greece, when boys were not at school and girls were not working, they played ball games with inflated pigs' bladders. They also played with knuckle bones. Children also played with spinning tops, dolls, model horses with wheels, hoops, and rocking horses. Art in ancient Greece. The Greeks were famous for drama. Theater probably began when a group of people called a chorus singing and dancing in honor of Dionysus, the god of Dionysius, in honor of Dionysius, the god of wine. Then, about 534 BC, a man named Thespis added a single actor to the chorus. A second actor was added, and then a third. Eventually, the three actors stood on a stage, while the chorus stood in the foreground and commented on the action. All the actors were male and they wore masks. The audience sat in tiers of seats in a semicircle. Our word theater is derived from the Greek word theatron, which means the place where people listen. The ancient Greeks invented tragedy, in which some great person is destroyed not by wickedness but through error. They also wrote comedies. Our word comedy comes from the Greek word for merry-making, komodia. Among the great Greek dramatists were Aeschylus, lived from 525 to 456 BC, Aristophanes, 448 to 380 BC, Euripides, 480 to 406 BC, and Sophocles, 496 to 406 BC. A woman named Sappho, who lived about 600 BC, was a famous poet. The Greeks are also famous for their lifelike sculpture. Among the great sculptors were Thaddeus, 490 to 430 BC, Praxiteles, and Lysippos, both of whom lived and worked in about the second half of the 4th century BC. One of the greatest examples of Greek sculpture is the Venus de Milo, which was carved about 100 BC. One of the greatest examples of Greek sculpture is the Venus de Milo, which was carved about 100 BC. It was found on the Greek island of Milos in 1820. Unfortunately, the arms are missing. Ancient Greek pottery often has scenes from mythology or everyday life painted on it. In the 6th century BC, figures in black glaze were painted against a red background. This was called the black figure style. About 520 BC, the red figure style was introduced. The colors were reversed. In ancient Greece, funerary urns usually had figures painted on a white background. Painting on walls was also an important art in ancient Greece. Unfortunately, very few examples survive. Greek musicians played a wind instrument like a clarinet. One pipe was called the alo, and two pipes played together were called aloi. 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 Greeks also played cymbals and a stringed instrument called the lyre. They also played a kind of tambourine called a tympanon. And this is the Greek theater. I have no idea where this is at. Probably this is somewhere in Western Turkey somewhere. And they say that if you stand right here and you drop a penny or a quarter, you can actually hear it at the furthest tier or the highest tier of seats because of the accretion of the vibration of sounds. It's done in perfect symphony. So the Greeks were able to master that art in their architecture. Architecture in ancient Greece. Symmetry was very important to the Greeks, and Greek architects went to pains to work out correct ratios and proportions. Greek architecture is usually divided into three styles called orders. They are Doric, Ionic, and Corinthian. The most important temples had colonnades, that is, rows of columns in one of the three styles. Doric columns were relatively short and broad. Their height was 6 times the diameter of their base. They were also quite plain and simple, although they did have fluting, vertical indentations for decoration. Ionic and Corinthian columns were 9 times the diameter of their base in height. Both had tops called capitals. Ionic columns had capitals carved like scrolls, while Corinthian columns had columns carved like leaves. The most famous work of Greek architecture is the Parthenon, a temple dedicated to Athena in Athens. The building began in 447 BC after the end of the Persian Wars and was completed in 438 BC, just before the Peloponnesian War. Ancient Greek philosophers. Ancient Greece produced some great astronomers. Anaxagoras, 500 to 428 BC, realized that the moon does not shine with its own light, but reflects light from the sun. Aristarchus, who lived from 310 to 230 BC, realized that the earth spins on its axis. He also realized that the earth moves around the sun, not the other way round. Finally, Aristophanes, that's it, Aristophanes 276 to 194 BC calculated the circumference of the earth. The Greeks are also famous for their philosophers. Philosopher means lover of wisdom. Among the greatest philosophers were Socrates, 469 to 399 BC, Plato, 428 to 348 BC, and Aristotle, 384 to 322 BC. One of the most influential philosophers was Empedocles, 494 to 434 BC. He taught that the world was made of four elements: earth, fire, water, and air. This view dominated Western thought until the 17th century. A brilliant mathematician named Pythagoras, 580 to 500 BC, made important discoveries. Another mathematician called Euclid wrote a geometry book called The Elements. It was a standard textbook for over 2,000 years. Meanwhile, a Greek named Democritus, lived from 460 to 370 BC, said that all things are made of tiny pieces of matter that he called atoms. However, it was not until the 19th century that he was proved right. Herodotus, 484 to 424 BC, was the first famed historian of worth, and was also a great historian. He has been called the father of history. Religion in ancient Greece. The ancient Greeks were polytheists. They worshipped many gods and goddesses. The Greeks imagined that gods and goddesses were like human beings. Among the gods and goddesses were Aphrodite, goddess of beauty and love; Athena, goddess of wisdom; Artemis, goddess of hunting, the moon and childbirth; and Ares, god of war. They also worshipped Dionysus, god of wine. He was also the god of music, dancing, and the theater. Demeter, goddess of crops. Hephaestus, the blacksmith of the gods. So now you know who is the god of blacksmiths, because this is called Forge Gang. But yeah. Hephaestus, the blacksmith of the gods, and Hermes, the messenger of the gods. Other gods were Poseidon, god of the sea, and Hades, the god of the dead, who ruled over a gloomy underworld where the spirits of the dead dwelt. Apollo was the god of the sun, music, and poetry. The chief god was Zeus. His wife was Hera, the goddess of marriage. Every polis or city had many temples. People went to the temple to pray. Outside them were altars where offerings were made and animals were sacrificed. Very often, Greek houses also had an altar in the courtyard where they made offerings to the gods. When ancient Greeks died, they were either buried or they were cremated, and their ashes were then buried. Food, drink, and goods were buried with the dead person. And from time to time, the family of the dead person made offerings on the grave. The ancient Greeks believed that when you died, a ferryman called Chiron, rode your spirit across a river called the Styx to the entrance of the underworld. The entrance was guarded by a three-headed dog called Cerberus, who prevented anyone from leaving. If you were very bad during your life, then after your death, you went to a place called Tartarus to be punished. If you were very good, you went to a beautiful place called the Elysium fields to be rewarded. However, most people were neither particularly good nor bad. After death, they went to a dull and dismal place. The Greeks believed that if they made offerings to a dead relative, it would temporarily brighten their existence in the dreary underworld. And this is the famed Parthenon. Something that a lot of people don't know is that this was actually a church for 1,000 years. It was a temple to Athena and to the gods for about 1,000 years, and then for 1,000 years it was a church, and then 400 years it served as a mosque. And now, of course, it's an open museum. But anyways, a lot of people didn't know that. Also, the reason why it looks like this is because the Venetians, when they were firing or bombarding Athens, there was a bunch of gunpowder that was stored up in here, and somehow it caused an explosion and it destroyed an entire part of the Parthenon. So that's why it looks like that. That was in 1687 or something. Weapons in ancient Greece. Ancient Greek armies were based on infantry called hoplites. The hoplite had to buy his own armor and weapons, so he usually came from the middle class. Hoplites were protected by helmets, breastplates, and backplates, and shin guards called greaves. They carried round bronze shields. Hoplites carried 1.8 meter long spears made of wood with a metal point. They also carried swords and daggers. When they went into battle, hoplites marched in lines with their shields overlapping to form a metal wall. Only the rich could afford horses, so they provided the cavalry. Cavalrymen carried 2 throwing spears and a sword. Poor men became archers or were armed with slings. They did not wear armor. The Athenians also had a large navy. The ships were called triremes. They had 3 rows of oars. 2 rows poked out of portholes. The 3rd row was on the top deck. Ships were armed with a ram at the prow. And finally, there is medicine in ancient Greece. The roots of modern medicine are in ancient Greece. On the one hand, most Greeks believed in a god of healing called Asclepius. People who were ill made sacrifices or offerings to the god. They then slept overnight in his temple. They believed that the god would visit them in their sleep, in their dreams, and when they woke up, they would be healed. At the same time, ancient Greek doctors developed a rational theory of disease and sought cures. However, one did not replace the other. The cult of Asclepius and Greek medicine existed side by side. Medical schools were formed in Greece and Greek colonies around the Mediterranean. As early as 500 BC, a man named Alcmaeon from Croton in Italy said that the body was healthy if it had the right balance of hot and cold, wet and dry. If the balance was upset, the body grew ill. However, the most famous Greek doctor is Hippocrates, 460 to 377 BC. Although historians now believe that he was much less famous in his own time than was once thought, it is believed that many of the medical books ascribed to him were written by other men. Hippocrates stressed that doctors should carefully observe the patient's symptoms and take note of them. Hippocrates also rejected all magic, and he believed in herbal remedies. Several Greeks speculated that the human body was made up of elements. If they were properly balanced, the person was healthy. However, if they became unbalanced, the person fell ill. Finally, Aristotle, 384 to 322 BC, put forward a theory of disease. He believed the body was made up of 4 humors or liquids. They were phlegm, blood, yellow bile, and black bile. If a person had too much of one humor, they fell ill. For instance, if a person had a fever, he must have too much blood. The treatment was to cut the patient and let him bleed. The Greeks also knew that diet, exercise, and keeping clean was important for health. Later, Alexander the Great conquered Egypt. In 332 BC, he founded the city of Alexandria, and a great medical school was established there. Doctors in Alexandria dissected human bodies, and they gained a much better knowledge of anatomy. However, little progress was made in understanding diseases otherwise. Hey, what's up, Code of Truth? What is up, Soulbreaker? How are you doing? And what's up, Interdimensional Lizard? Parthenon at 2024 versus Parthenon at 300 BC. Yeah, a lot of that was because in 1687, the Venetians fired cannons at Athens, and they blew up a powder keg in the Turk, and it exploded and destroyed a side of the Parthenon. There's also other things that happened as well. All right, so Greek mythology, the organization of Greek society, the Olympic Games, housing, food. There is so much invaluable contributions that the ancient Greeks have made to just human civilization overall. Greece was, without a shadow of a doubt, the first truly Western culture. It was truly the first actual Western civilization. This is the beginning of European civilization. The history of ancient Greece, briefly, the whole story. This is from a Russian website, istmira.com. Dragoi Drvinimir. Istorija Driviniji Grakie Gratkovija Istorija. And this is a map of ancient Greece. This does not include the colonies in the Black Sea and Mediterranean and Tiresian Sea. The brief history of ancient Greece. Ancient Hellas was the name. Ancient Hellas was the name of the country that we know as Greece. According to the Athenian scientist Apollodor, the founder of their people is Elin, the son of Deucalion, who was the son of Prometheus. Therefore, the Greeks themselves consider themselves his descendants and call themselves Hellenes or Hellenes. By the 11th century BC, in the 2nd century BC, Hellas was conquered by the Romans, and it was the Romans that gave their Latin name Greece, and its inhabitants, which the Romans referred to as Greeks. The time when Greece was Hellas is commonly referred to as antiquity, or as antique, which means antiquity in Latin. Referred to as archaic. The time when Greece was Hellas is commonly referred to as archaic, which means antiquity in Latin. The history of ancient Greece is conditionally divided into the following stages: Minoan, Mycenaean or Achaean, and Hellenistic. The territory of Greece can be divided into south, middle, and north. Southern part of the country had heroic Sparta. Middle Greece occupied Athens. The northern territory belonged to Thessaly and Macedonia, or Thessaly and Macedonia. Macedonia. Let's see here. Am I still live? Yeah. Early development period of Greece from 3000 to 1000 BC. Greece arose at a time when the Greeks themselves could be considered as barbarians as the peoples around them. Minoan stage, approximately 2700 to 1400 BC, refers to the earliest period of development of Greece. At this stage, the sea-state of King Minos arises on the island of Crete, by whose name the entire period is named. It is with him that the mythical legend of the monstrous monitor and Theseus who defeated him is connected. Natural cataclysm that erupted in the middle of the 15th century BC caused the fall of the Minoan civilization, which led to the conquest of Crete by the Mycenaeans. Mycenaean stage, approximately 1600 to 1100 BC. It is about this civilization that is narrated in the famous ancient works Iliad and Odyssey by the poet Homer. Historical information about this time has not been preserved, and the only source for us is Homer's poem Iliad, which tells about the Trojan War. For a long time, Iliad was considered just a literary fiction. However, Troy was discovered or rediscovered by the German archaeologist Heinrich Schliemann, who managed to find the ruins of the ancient Troy, and then the legend became a reality. Mycenaeans created Mycenaean civilization, but themselves were destroyed by tribes of the more wild and backward Dorians. After that, Greece plunged into the so-called Dark Age. The Archaic period of development, 750 to 500 BC. Greek civilization rises to a new stage of development. It is at this time that independent city-states arise, which are called polis, from the word policy. Our familiar word megapolis has also happened. Also, the word policy, the word politics, comes from the polis. The most famous city-states are Athens, Sparta, and Corinth. Athens became the center of culture of ancient Greece. Famous poets, speakers, and philosophers perform here, which means lovers of wisdom. It is in Athens that appears the occurrence of democracy, which means power of the people, from demos, Greek, people, and kratos, Greek, power. However, this democracy was not complete, since slaves and women did not have the right to vote in it. Sparta was the exact opposite of Athens. It was a state of warriors in which there was no place for democracy. It is interesting that two kings immediately ruled Sparta. One of them commanded the army and drove it to war, and the second dealt with administrative issues. Sparta's economy was provided by slaves, elots, helots, or helots. Every man in Sparta since childhood studied military skill, which continued to improve his whole life. As a result of this, the Spartan army was the strongest and most enduring in ancient Greece. Another famous city in ancient Greece is Thebes. Interestingly, the power in this city was exercised by a group of wealthy citizens known as oligarchs. That's where this familiar word came to us, oligarchy. On the one hand, oligarchs, like fire, were afraid of Athenian democracy. On the other hand, warlike Sparta was also not an option for them. As a result, Thebes represented a cross between the democratic Athens and the militarized Sparta, or autocratic Sparta. Classical development, or the classical period, which is by far the most well-known period. 500 to 323 BC. During this period, ancient Greece reached its highest peak. It laid the foundations of almost all currently known sciences. And so here are, very briefly, some of the many contributions that the Greeks gave to the world. Science and politics. Outstanding politician, speaker, and commander in Athens by the name of Pericles, or Pericles, or Phericles, which in fact becomes the ruler of Athens. History will be born from the works of Herodotus. Archimedes and Pythagoras create the foundations of arithmetic and geometry. Medicine. Hippocrates, the doctor, Hippocrates, the father of medicine, lays the foundation for that science. His famous Hippocratic oath is still a code in medical honor, is still a code of medical honor and ethics. Architecture. A true masterpiece of architecture is the Parthenon, a temple erected in honor of the goddess of war Athena, Pallada, built in 447 BC from white marble by the talented architect Pheidias. Art. The Greeks considered the human body to be the height of perfection, and all works of art sing and glorify it in various angles and poses. The most famous creation, the famous Venus de Milos, or Venus Milos, the goddess of love and beauty, by the work of an unknown sculpture. Painting of Greece is represented by very skilled painting on numerous vases and amphorae. Religion. Ancient Greek mythology is considered a unique masterpiece of world literature that has survived to this day. In Greece, there was a whole pantheon of various gods and goddesses, and their adventures reached us in numerous myths. It is interesting that the Greek gods are very far from perfect, very familiar to people in this regard, and have familiar human qualities and vices: anger, envy, intrigues, jealousies, small dirty tricks, and even adultery. The classic Greek pantheon had in it 12 of the main gods, or 12 main gods. Moreover, in different versions of myths, their composition may change. The supreme ruling god of Olympus is Zeus, the lord of lightning. His brother Poseidon reigns over the water element and the sea, and his second brother Hades over the underworld, or the kingdom of the dead. Zeus was not particularly picky about his connections. He very often changed his wives, but next to him was constantly one of his wife, Hera. Before her, the goddess of fate, the Muses. Zeus's daughter Athena was born in a very unusual way. Zeus was tormented by headaches for a long time, and then his son Hephaestus hit him with an axe on the head. A beautiful maiden in armor, Athena, came out of the wound. God of blacksmiths, Hephaestus, the unloved son of Zeus and Hera, he was born ugly and lame, for which Hera threw him off Olympus. In revenge for this, Hephaestus made a golden throne for Hera. As soon as Hera sat on the throne, her arms and legs fell into shackles that no one could take off. Dionysus, the god of wine-making, intoxicated Hephaestus and persuaded him to free his mother. In gratitude, Hera returned Hephaestus to Olympus. Apollo and Artemis, who were brother and sister, just the children of the other wife of Zeus, Summer. Artemis became a hunting goddess, patroness of animals, and Apollo the god of art and harmony. The goddess of love and beauty, Aphrodite, also appeared in a very peculiar way. When Kronos scraped Uranus, when Kronos cut off Uranus's balls, he threw his reproductive organ into the sea. It foamed, and from this sea foam formed in the place where it fell the beautiful Aphrodite, who went ashore. Hermes, the god of trade, crooks, and thieves, the son of Zeus and the nymphs of Maya. Also on Olympus there is Gestia, Zeus's older sister. Also on Olympus there is Gaia, Zeus's older sister. Very peaceful, unlike her violent brother. Zeus had connections with ordinary earthly women. From one of them, Alcmene, the son of Heracles, was born. His son Heracles was born. Named so because the jealous Hera tried by all means to ruin his life. She delayed his birth so that his cousin Eurystheus could be born ahead, for whom Heracles was to commit 12 exploits. The most interesting character, Pandora, a woman who was made by Hephaestus on the orders of Zeus, who decided to take revenge on people for Prometheus having given them fire. Each inhabitant of Olympus contributed to this matter and gave Pandora something. Aphrodite gave beauty, Athena cheap clothes, Hermes cunning and treachery, hence her name Pandora, in Greek all gifted. Pandora married Prometheus's brother Epimetheia, and at the wedding Zeus gave her a casket in which all human vices and tribulations were enclosed. Pandora opened this casket, and disasters broke out and spread across the ground. The daughter of Pandora and Epimetheia, Hera, and the son of Prometheus, Deucalion, got married. They had a son, Elene, whom the Greeks consider their ancestor and call themselves Hellenes. Pandora's box now means to do something irreparable or irreversible. Anyways, drama and philosophy. Famous authors Sophocles and Aeschylus come to drama, and philosophy receives such geniuses as Plato, Socrates, and Aristotle. In the case of theater, Greece gave the world such a magical action as a theater. Initially, poets performed their works on Dionysos, religious mysteries dedicated to the god Dionysius. Gradually, they turned into theatrical performances. It is interesting that all roles, even women, were played by men. All modern theater buildings are built according to the type of ancient Greek amphitheaters. Moreover, antique Moreover, ancient actors did without microphones, while they were heard in the very last row. This secret of acoustics was also invented in ancient Greece. Sport. From ancient Greece, the legendary Olympic Games come to us. Conceived in honor of the god Zeus, who sat on Mount Olympus. All modern sports have come out of these ancient sports. At the time of their conduct, it was even customary to end all wars. Army and fleet. The basis of the Greek combat fleet were triremes, ships with 3-meter rows of with oars on each side. Ancient Greece. In the same period, Greece had to face an invasion of Persians who were trying to enslave the freedom-loving Greeks. In the face of a common enemy, the eternal rivals Athens and Sparta from disputes and united against the common enemy. By 490 BC, near the Greek city Marathon, occurred the famous Marathon battle, which ended in the victory of the Greeks. According to legend, a Greek warrior named Philippides ran without stopping from that word does not translate from Russian very good. It's called Philippides. That's it, Phidippides. Okay, it's Phidippides. My bad. A Greek war, according to legends, ran without form the news of the victory. As soon as he reached Athens, he managed to exclaim, "Rejoice, Athenians, we won," and fell lifeless. From here went the name Marathon Run. That is distance running 42 kilometers, 195 meters. This distance was from Marathon. This was the distance from Marathon to Athens. In 480 BC, there was the Battle of Thermopylae, in which they fell to death, in which the Persians all fell to death before the brave 300 Spartans led by the king of Sparta, Leonidas. Legendary feat of the 300 Spartans who detained the Persian army of immortals at the cost of their lives are still inspire artists and directors to create paintings and feature films. After defeating the Persians, the relationship between Sparta and Athens again escalated, and they already met each other in the Peloponnesian War, which lasted for 30 years and ended with the victory of Sparta. However, the Spartans did not have time to enjoy the victory, because very soon the whole of Greece was defeated by the Macedonian king Philip, the father of the legendary Alexander the Great, nicknamed for the many victories of his. After the victory over Greece, the future Alexander the Great himself took a trip to Persia, defeating which he passed a triumphal march around the world and stopped only in India. Hellenistic development period 323 to 31 BC. The campaigns of Alexander the Great led Greece to its zenith of glory. Of Macedon. Alexander of Macedon, in his own words, once said, "One Greek cost thousands of barbarians." After the death of Alexander, his immense empire broke up as quickly as it was conquered. Its territory was divided among themselves by 4 deputy generals who had served under Alexander. Greek civilization was replaced by the Iron Empire of Rome, and Greece became one of the Roman provinces. El of the Persians. By the way, this guy is Beans. This guy here is Beans. And he is from the J-Danks army, and he's from the American Midwest. This is Beans. He's pals with a fat, lazy redneck named J-Danks 420. If you wanted to know who that is. This is Sparta! All right, enough of that. Chauncey. Well, I can't. I'll just type it out. I can't talk about it on this front. There, I'll just type it out in chat. All right, I'm going to get back to my shit. You know, I lost what time it is actually. Okay. I don't know what happened, but at Imperator of Forge, Wacky Wacky put down the Snaky. Tell us more about ancient European history. Let's see here. It looks like I've been out for a long time. Frick, dude. Okay, I'll go ahead and share again. I don't care how long this stream is. I'm enjoying this a lot. Is it working? There we go. Let's see here. The political structure of ancient Hellas was not intricate, despite the fact that the territorial mosaic was a kind of gossip in a single whole of about 1,500 some individual vassals of one king. These particles were controlled, these policies were controlled equally. The High Council consisted of the so-called oligarchs, those who ruled over the minority, and so this word became known to everyone, appeared, oligarchy. The female half had no special rights, but was also divided into castes. The rich townspeople did all day that they did nothing, except once again they sorted out the supplies in their jewelry box. Free-loving getters gave time to self-education, music, and arts. They themselves chose a permanent partner and almost never became official wives. The slaves worked from dawn to night and did not have time to see anything else around. Ancient Greece, the mother of democracy, it was here that the habit of choosing representatives of the authorities arose, and voters received the most real salary for this action. The turnout at the event was always provided. Only secured citizens, women, servants, and foreign guests could never participate or had no right to participate in the elections. Only free-born men could do so. Okay. The Pelasgians, or the Pelasgians. All right, so there's the center, south, and north. Natural picturesque. So the southern areas are called Lycaonia. This is where Sparta is in the south. The capital of Athens is about in the center, with Aetolia, Attica, and Phakedia, which occupy the center, the northern edge. And it says getting to them from Athens can be incredibly difficult. The north and center were divided by practically impenetrable mountain peaks, which prevent the establishment of strong ties between the heart of the state and the important outskirts. World Heritage of Greek Civilization. The whole world takes off its hat in a thankful bow before the legacy of ancient Greece, delivered to its descendants, the merits of the inquisitive header. Without them, there would be no modern models, the foundations of the universe, philosophy about the material and intangible worlds of Aristotle, international Olympic games, art temples such as theaters with innovative acoustics, poetic literature from Homer, and fabulous myths about the gods and their adventures, the historical form of the description of military battles from Herodotus, mathematical theorem and axioms from Pythagoras, Euclid, and Archimedes. An elegant presentation of reality in the form of art, paintings, and sculptures. A world ancient without ancient Greece would be meager and boring, and the planet would not have achieved many achievements without the invaluable contribution of Hellas to the process. All right. Everyday life in ancient Greece from perhaps the 4th century BC. Everyday life in ancient Greece, 4th century BC. Centered within a loose collection of city-states, often at war with one another, ancient Greek culture reached its pinnacle during the 4th century BC, an era described as its golden age. Art, theater, music, poetry, philosophy, and political experiments such as democracy flourished. Greek influence stretched along the northern rim of the Mediterranean from the shores of Asia Minor to the Italian peninsula. In Athens, society was male-dominated. Only men could be citizens, and only upper-class males enjoyed a formal education. Women had few political rights and were expected to remain in the home and bear children. Fully 1/4 of the population was made up of slaves, usually prisoners captured during the many clashes that extended Greek influence over. These slaves provided much of the manpower that fueled the bargaining economy, working in shipyards, quarries, mines, and as domestic servants. Most homes were modest, windowless, and wrapped around a courtyard. Furniture was rare. People spent the majority of the day out of doors enjoying the mild Mediterranean climate. The Greek diet was also modest, based largely on wine and bread. A typical day would start with bread dipped in wine, the same for lunch, and a dinner of wine, fruits, vegetables, and fish. Consumption of meat was reserved for special occasions such as religious holidays. A glimpse of the average day in ancient Greece. Xenophon. Here he describes the manner in which the ideal Greek aristocrat would pass the hours of a typical morning. Xenophon uses the literary device in which the story is supposed to be told by Socrates, who is speaking with a friend by the name of Astromachus. Socrates has asked his friend to describe how he spent. Astromachus responds, "Why then, Socrates, my habit is to rise from bed." Betimes. Why then, Socrates, my habit is to rise from bed betimes, when I may still expect to find at home this, that, or the other friend whom I may wish to see. Then if anything has to be done in town, I set off to transact the business and make that my walk. Or if there be no business to transact in my town, my serving boy leads on my horse to the farm. I follow and I make the country road my walk, which suits my purpose quite well or better. Socrates, perhaps, then pacing up and down the colonnade in the city, then when I have reached the farm where mayhap some of my men are planting trees or breaking fallow, sowing or getting in the crops, I inspect the various labors with an eye to every detail. And wherever I can improve upon the present system, I introduce reform. After this, usually I mount my horse and take a canter. I put him through his paces, suiting these so far as possible to those inevitable in war. In other words, I avoid neither steep slope nor sheer incline, neither trench nor runnel, only giving my uttermost head the while, so as to not to lame my horse while exercising him. When that is over, the boy gives the horse a roll and leads him homeward, taking at the same time from the country to town whatever we may chance to need. Meanwhile, I am off for home, partly walking, partly running, and having reached home, I take a bath and give myself a rub, and then I breakfast, a repast that leaves me neither hungry nor overfed, and will suffice me through the day. And so here is but merely a list of ancient Greek classics. Jason and the Golden Fleece by Apollonius of Rhodes. Poetics by Aristotle. The Trojan Woman and Other Plays by Euripides. The Histories by Herodotus. The Iliad by Homer. Republic by Plato. Greek Lives by Plutarch. Antigone, Eopides the King, Electra by Sophocles. And then finally, to close out, I'll read some of the Greek literature. Let's see here. Hymn to Dionysius, Greek texts. Okay, I'll just go ahead and give a sample. So might as well give a sampling of ancient Greek literature. Let's do the Fiato. That's it, the Fiato, the Fado, Fido. Or Phaidon, the Phaidon. Go to Gutenberg.org. Can you actually see this? All right. Yeah, just go ahead and just kind of give a sample of this. I also need to give a sample of literature of the ancient Hindus. I forgot to do that. So here we go. Upon this, Cebes said, I am glad, Socrates, that you have mentioned the name of Aesop. for it reminds me of a question which has been asked by many, and was asked of me only the day before yesterday by Evenus the poet. He will be sure to ask it again, and therefore, if you would like me to have an answer ready for him, you may as well tell me what I should say to him. He wanted to know why you, who never before wrote a line of poetry, now that you are in prison, are turning Aesop's fables into verse, and also composing that hymn in honor of Apollo. Tell him, Sabis, he replied, what is the truth? That I had no idea of rivaling him or his poems. To do so, I knew, would be no easy task, but I wanted to see whether I could purge away a scruple which I felt about the meaning of certain dreams. In the course of my life, I have often had intimations in dreams that I should compose music. The same dream came to me sometimes in one form and sometimes in another, but always saying the same or nearly the same words. Cultivate and make music, said the dream. And hitherto I had imagined that this was only intended to exhort and encourage me in the study of philosophy, which has been the pursuit of my life and is the noblest and best of music. The dream was bidding me to do what I was always doing. In the same way, the competitor in a race is bidden by the spectators to run when he is already running. But I was not certain of this, for the dream might have meant music in the popular sense of the word, and being under sentence of death, and the festival giving me a respite, I thought that it would be safer for me to satisfy the scruple, and in obedience to the dream, to compose a few verses before I departed. And first I made a hymn in honor of the god of the festival, and then considering that a poet, if he is really to be a poet, should not only put together words, but should invent stories, and that I have no invention, I took some fables of Aesop, which I had ready at hand, and which I knew. They were the first I came upon, and turned them into verse. Tell this to Evenus, Sabis, Cabus, and bid him of good cheer. Say that I would have him come after me if he be a wise man and not tarry, and that today I am likely to be going, for the Athenians say that I must. And so, that is but only one of many thousands of examples of ancient Greek literature and just world literature in general. So, yeah, I mean, I could do this all day. I could literally be here for 5 or 6 hours just reading this stuff. I could literally be here for 10 hours just reading only stuff about ancient Greece. Let's see here. Yeah, I'll go ahead and read this. The inhabitants of Laconica, or Laconia, The main stages of the development of ancient Greece. And by the way, I have used Tor. Yeah, I've used Tor. NordVPN is probably better. You guys want more freestyles? Yeah, I'll just type it in the comments section. Man. VPN. Do you use VPN? Yeah, a lot of people protect their browsing data with a VPN system. They don't want people to know their doxes. Um Oh, you don't? All right. The main stages of the development of ancient Greece in detail. Ancient Greece details of the main milestones of the development of an unusual state. Glorified politician and skilled commander Alexander the Great not only considered Greece a tidbit of the planet for any conqueror, but also spoke about natives. One Greek costs thousands of barbarians. A small state with a compact territory and a galaxy of islands in geographical bins has managed to take a very active part in the development of civilization on Earth since ancient times. A country with a rich history was able to shut up exotic Egypt, bearing the proud name Gates of God, Babylon, and replaced Iran's Persia during the gray haired days, for a belt in science and crafts, the roasts of future culture and arts, the foundations of mathematics, politics, and medicine. The rudiments of sport on a planetary scale did not appear somewhere in a mighty space, namely here on a small piece of land on the southern outskirts of the Balkan Peninsula and the place of archipelagos on the coast of the Aegean Sea. Greece went to well-deserved success on the European and world stage, working hard and showing a burning interest in everything unknown. The stages of the development of the state, worthy of the status of the cradle of world civilization, are worthy of study and awareness for everyone who considers themselves a sophisticated person with intellectual abilities. Some resource data. Any success is composed of several key components, of which the well-being of the Greeks grew and rose up relied on the existing prerequisites and objective factors. Geography and territory. Ancient Hellas was divided into three unequal relief regions, center, south, and north. Each area got its natural, rather picturesque charms. Greece is, and you can actually swim in it almost all year round. But some of the most famous places of coastline in the world is located in Greece. Fertile plains, mountains covered with overgrown with thicker rare greenery, Rocky gorges carved or lower rivers, waterfalls, volumetric expanses of the seacoast. Southern areas were formerly called Laconia, rather known to modern people as legendary harsh Sparta. The current capital, Athens, is in the center, along with Aetolia, Attica, and Phoceida occupied the center. Northern edges were called Thessaly, and getting to them from Athens was incredibly difficult. The north and center were divided by practically impenetrable mountain peaks, which prevent the establishment of strong ties between the heart of the state and the important outskirts. Aborigines of ancient Greece. The expression that has come down to this day, handsome as a Greek god, has a solid ground under him. It is difficult to say that it served as an impetus to the sincere love of the Greeks for art, and made their hands so skillful. But since ancient times, the inhabitants of the beauty of Hellas have perfectly mastered the skills of painting and sculpture. The Pelasgians, as they called the islanders, invariably the long life of the ancient Greeks was unevenable. Men barely reached the age of 45 to 50. Women could not overcome the bar of the age of 35 to 40. The worst thing was with the kids, many of whom were never able to overcome the age threshold of 1 to 3 years due to frequent illnesses and poor health. Women and men tried to change the color of their eyes with the help of a copper compound, which mercilessly harmed health and vision. Political games. The political structure of ancient Hellas was not intricate, despite the fact that the territorial mosaic was a kind of gossip in a single whole of about 1,500 or so urban settlements, vassals of, or some individual vassals of a king. These policies were controlled equally. The highest council consisted of the so-called oligarchs, those who rule over the minority, and so the word became known to everyone. Appeared. The female half had no special rights, but was also divided into caste. The rich townspeople did all day what they did, except once again they sorted out the supplies in their jewelry box. Free-loving people gave time to self-education, music, and arts. They themselves chose a permanent partner and almost never became official wives. The slaves worked from dawn to night and did not have time to see anything else around. Ancient Greece is the mother of democracy. It was here that the habit of choosing representatives of the authorities arose, and voters received the moral real salary for this action. The turnout at the event was always provided. Only secured citizens, women, servants, and foreign guests could not participate in the elections. Stages of popular self-awareness, a step forward but 2 steps back. The ongoing civil strife between the regions of ancient Greece constantly led to a change of 2 states, progress and regression. The level of development of the population occupied different, sometimes very different levels. About 5,000 years ago, the Pelasgians, who achieved notable successes despite objective difficulties in farming and cattle breeding, and already had written language lost their lands to the northerners, the Achaeans in battles. Mycenaean civilization ended in the 13th century BC, which was forced to yield to the hard. I'll give the Dorians a drink, standing development at a much slower pace, but fierce and merciless. The era of the Dorians was subsequently called the Dark Era for becoming breaks in the development of ancient Greece, was marked by endless strife between Sparta and Athens and a complete eclipse of writing until its loss. All construction achievements, improvement of tools and household items were nullified. The dark history continued from the 12th to the 9th centuries BC. She brought nothing good to the treasury of achievements, and the notorious southern Sparta, the favorite occupation of the Spartans at all times, was war. The system did not spare the comrades in arms. The weak were immediately killed. The wounded on the battlefield were left to die without medical attention. The famous expression, Spartan barracks conditions, which came to this day, in those days meant a complete ban on luxury. Spartan conditions, a complete ban on luxury, unquestioned submission to the will of the elders, the difficult survival of the family on a dedicated piece of land without the right to increase it. Trade, crafts, and agriculture were considered second-class activities and were not welcomed. The inhabitants of Laconia saw the ways of developing the state only in war, robbery, and violence against other Greeks. The life of the inhabitants of Athens was completely different. Culture and art were complained and encouraged here. Rude Spartans were considered despots and upstarts. The negative side of the existence was the unwillingness of the authorities to work for the benefit of themselves and the people. In the 20th century, the word tyrant, translated as lord, not wanting to work and robbing his subjects, migrated from those times. Good and progressive trends in Athens were introduced at that time only by King Solon, trying in every possible way to solve things by the world and making the life of the townspeople more pleasant and comfortable. By the 5th century BC, the territory of ancient Greece attracted close attention of the Persians. Persian warriors by that time had already conquered Media, Babylon, and Egypt. A state with a developed architectural world, a mild, fertile climate, a host of natural and man-made wealth promised Persia tempting prospects. The peoples of ancient Greece had the wisdom to forget about contention and unite against the Eastern Oriental enemy. The core of the Greek troops was the Spartans, who were well trained in military affairs. The Athenian masters soon began to create the first Greek navy. The Persian leader Darius, unreasonable, considered Greek soldiers full amateurs and lost the very first battle with the Hellenes. This event caused the word in the world vocabulary, marathon. 40 kilometers ran a warrior from the village of Marathon to Athens by the name of Philadius, inspired by victory in battle to usher in military success, and after reporting joyful news, His heart could not stand the load and stopped forever. So on our planet, there is such a term and type of sports as marathon running. After a series of futile attempts by the Persians to restore the status quo of their army in the rank of invincible, neither Darius himself nor his son Xerxes were able to subjugate Greece. Ancient Hellas acquired the status of the most influential state and received the right to decide the fate of the commercial world of the entire Eastern Mediterranean, which became an unconditional impetus for its rapid development. Friendly Spartan Athens again showed himself on the map of history during the wars with Macedonia of Philippi II. This time the forces were not equal, and the Greeks were forced to surrender to the winners. Only Sparta did not fall to the Macedonian shackles. The rest of the territories were under the jurisdiction of the Macedonians. The alliance of Greek and Macedonian peoples has benefited both states. Added to past successes of the conquests of Alexander the Great, the Greek-Macedonian duo became the sovereign owner of all the territories of Asia before the appearance of the Roman Empire on the world. World Heritage of Greek Civilization. The whole world takes off its hat in the thankful bow before the agency of ancient Greece. The merits of inquisitive Hellenes are noticeable in many areas of science and culture. Without them, there would be no modern models, the foundations of the universe, philosophy about the material and intangible worlds of Aristotle, international Olympic Games, art temples such as amphitheaters with innovative acoustics, poetic literature from Homer, and fabulous myths about the gods and their adventures, the historical form of the description of military battles from Herodotus, mathematical theorem and axioms from Pythagoras, Euclid, and Archimedes, an elegant presentation of reality in the form of art paintings and sculptures. A world ancient story without ancient Greece would indeed be meager and boring, and the planet would not have achieved many achievements without the invaluable contribution of Hellas or Greece to the process of the overall development of life on Earth. Historical periods of ancient Greece and their features. To add strokes to the portrait of the wisdom and misses of ancient Greece. Historians divided her life into several conditional periods, each of which should stay in more detail. The early period that fell from 1050 to 750 BC. Here came after leaving from the non-existence of the Mycenaean civilization of the Aegean Bronze Era. Written information about this period was practically not preserved, either because of the eclipse of writing or because of the destruction of traces by attacks of the elements and wars. Some learned men like to call this time segment, Dark Age, due to the fact that they do not have the opportunity to look into ancient manuscripts. The period was marked by preparations for the transition to the Iron Age, as well as the beginnings of the future political system, cultural sprouts, especially in the manufacture of more convenient and more colorful ceramic products, prototypes of modern Greek dishes. The territories are fragmented, and they are controlled by the so-called kings or leaders, local hegemons with the same bet. Stories from life by local residents are passed from mouth to mouth, superimposed on music, giving birth to lyrical songs, and begin to record only after plagiarism of letters from the Phoenician alphabet, the undoubted emphasis of the early period, the birth of a galaxy of myths about the gods and simple mortal Greeks, distinguished by exploits. The richest contribution to world literature is Homer's poetic masterpiece. Colorful works about the journey of Odysseus are written in 776 BC. In 776 BC, the Iliad and Odyssey, which enter the school curriculum in literature around the world and find ever new admirers among inquisitive readers of them. The Archaic period, which lasted from 750 to 500 BC. Aborigines at the dawn of the 8th century increasingly leave their homes and go looking for a better share on the Mediterranean coast of other states. Diaspora formed in a foreign land unexpectedly acquire a political connotation. Appears the first polys, propagating exponentially and soon entangled about 700 settlements. The inevitable integration of life and culture of foreign Greeks and local residents take place. Under the influence of Oriental motifs, drawings of Flora and Fiona and Fiona appear on Greek dishes. A separate direction painting with the image of favorite scenes from a mixture of Greek and Eastern traditions and legends is developing. The main raw material, clay, stone, and wood. The masterful Greeks are suddenly fond of creating enormous statues of archaic sculptures. Despite strong pressure from the Egyptian technology for making monuments, the Greeks add their tendencies to it with notes of clear symmetry, air lightness, and realism of images. The heyday of architecture is taking place, especially regarding the construction of colorful temples with columns and frieze. A little pompous poetry is replaced by romantic creations with an exquisite loop of sentimentality. The coinage is being improved. Trade operations with neighboring states are growing. At this time in Greece itself, Sparta and Athens again do not find a common language on a number of important political issues. Spartans tighten their belts all the same, literally introduce strict discipline and a rigid hierarchy. The result is obvious. Athens, carried away by common concessions and a game of democracy, yield to Sparta the palm of the championship in the country and weaken their position in the state as a whole. The Classic period, which took time from 500 to 323 BC, coincides in the time periods with wars with Persia and Macedonia. The victory over the Persian barbarians serves the benefit of the development of the Greek military flotilla and the construction of peaceful merchant ships. The success in the military field is echoed by the unprecedented flowering of politics, literature, philosophy, and the arts. Democracy job seekers are now eligible for official fees. Cash streams into the Greek piggy banks, flowing from subject areas contribute to the political, economic, and cultural growth of Athens. Creative workshops work for the most real salary and the brightest Greek masterpieces that made up the grain of the world collection of sculptures and art paintings or mosaics are born. The priority is the perfect beauty of the human body, embodied in the galaxy of stunning wonders of stone architecture. Scientists of the men of ancient Greece do not lag behind the creative maestro. It is during this period that representatives of the natural sciences, philosophy, and histories come to the fore, turning the views on the world of the entire human community. Classical Greece thrives, develops, and enhances its wealth. The black spot on the biography, ancient Greece, is the long-standing conflict between calm and peaceful Athens and warlike Sparta. The Peloponnesian War, which gains momentum in 431. The 10-year war ends with the defeat of Athens and becomes the cause of interference in the affairs of the state by Macedonia. On the throne of the Greek Empire, the Macedonian king is replaced by a military star, Alexander the Great, who turns Greece, a little weakened by the war, into a mighty power with extensive possessions, stretching from Albania to India. The construction of a powerful state takes 12 years. Ahead of ancient Greece is a new historical period. The Hellenistic period that sees time from 323 to 31 BC. After the death of Alexander, the king of Macedonia, spears cross over his inheritance. Macedonia, Egypt, Ptolemy, and the country of the Seleucids, which previously occupied vast spaces from present-day Turkey to modern Afghanistan. The struggle for the territory continues for another 50 years. This is known as the afterwards there is nothing monstrates. There is nothing left to take or to be given. The political structure, architectural trends, artistic crafts, philosophical fabrications in the conquered parts of the Greek world remain under the unquestioned influence of Greek tendencies. Acquaintance and kinship with Alexander the Great is considered a sign of belonging to the caste of the elect. The cosmopolitanism of ancient Greece in many directions remains invaluable. On coins, the faces of the great are given the features of the deity or the gods. All disputes are resolved only in Greek. Travelers from all over the world rush to Greece, wishing to get to know the great power better. The influence of enlightenment and education is growing steadily. Books and works are unheard of popularity are at the Great Alexandria Library. Great books and works are in the Library of Alexandria. There is a social split on rich and poor. In the midst of the working people, displeasure with the regime and confusion grow. The impoverishment of the lower strata of the population leads to economic decline throughout Macedonia, which becomes a prerequisite for the conquest of Greece by Roman troops. Of all the political heirs of Alexander the Macedonian, only Egypt Macedonia, and Seleucids managed to maintain strong positions. After the death of the wise queen of Egypt, Cleopatra VII, the Roman Empire does not have worthy rivals. Ancient Greece has already been fully conquered by more advanced and purposeful Romans. And in their justification, it is worth saying only one. All the cultural and scientific heritage of ancient Greece they preserve intact and even increase. The aging of the ancient Hellenes did not sink into oblivion and remained the most important parting words to earthlings as a warning to descendants. And so, on that note, I finally finish this long stream. Interdimensional Lizard says, all clear. Soulbreaker, is this Indo-European Greece or Paleo-European Greece? Post-Indo-European Greece. This is Indo-European Greece. Soulbreaker says, we used to hit kids in 1980 AD. Really? In the 1980s, you had like punishment for children? What happened that changed it? Soulbreaker says, bring me back to the good old times. Code of Truth says, forge! Gang! Soulbreaker says, the Parthenon at 2024 versus the Parthenon in 300 BC. Yeah, the Parthenon in 300 BC was much better. Soulbreaker, the Indo-European Greeks moved to Peloponnesus at 1800 BC, and European Greeks went to Crete at 1100 BC. Yeah, I would agree. Soulbreaker says Trojans were Paleo-Europeans as well. Soulbreaker says Sparta had two kings because of a myth that the sons of the first king were born at the same time, and no one knew who was born first except the mother that didn't want to say who was born first. All right, I didn't know that. Devin Reagan, nobody cares about your Spurg spile. You're a dumbass, dude. How about I just block you? All right, you're banned. Bye. You're gone, buddy. Thank you for contributing. Soulbreaker says Greece contributions to the world, medicine, politics, and philosophy versus Turk gays' contributions to the world, barbarism, warfare, poison, and stuff. Yeah, dude, Muslims are pretty dumb, aren't they? Muslims are pretty gross. Muslims are very backward. Soulbreaker says we care. Soulbreaker says L for the Persian. Chauncey Fatsack says this is Sparta! Chauncey Fatsack says Forge Gang! What is our profession? Soulbreaker says, oh, woo. Or oh. Chauncey Fatsack says, oh, oh, oh. Chauncey Fatsack says, I love the hit. You're very welcome. Dude, I'm enjoying reading them out. All right, so yeah, I said that Niccolo made Soberman cry in a VC over his dead mother. And that did happen. Chauncey Fatsack says, Forge Gang 1! Says, W for a win. Soulbreaker says, Crown equals a win. Chauncey Fatsack posts the crown, golden crown. Soulbreaker says, Spartan is the king. Sparta is king of the ancient world. Best hoplite, best armies of the ancient world. Chauncey Fatsack, tell us more about ancient European history. Well, indeed. This is the first European state. Chauncey Fatsack, hope he didn't boot himself off stream. I did. I actually did by accident. Soulbreaker says, bro forgot to close the stream. No, my terrible internet kicked me out. Bad algorithm kicked me out of the StreamYards, is what happened, Soulbreaker. Chauncey Fatsack, at Imperator of Forge, wakey, wakey, put down the snakey. Yes. Beans DDoS. Beans literally DDoSed me. Chauncey Fatsack says, LOL. Oh yeah, let me end that. Soulbreaker says, it's already bricked up. Interdimensional Lizard says, we're back. Yes, we're back, baby. Woohoo! Soulbreaker says, how fast would the stream run on Tor? I probably would not even be able to get it to function on Tor. But then, I don't know. I've never tried StreamYards on Tor browser. Soulbreaker says, Greece is a winner of culture and world history. And I would agree. Soulbreaker says, another Greek classic. Soulbreaker says, I can see it. Soulbreaker says, freestyle in ancient Greece. And then I said some stuff about VPNs. Soulbreaker says, mold that VPN. Soulbreaker says he doesn't use VPNs. Soulbreaker says, Alexander Macedonia, black man versus Alexander the Great has a white man in Greece. Yeah, so there's this stuff that goes on in the Balkans, and when Yugoslavia broke up, socialist Yugoslavia broke apart, Macedonia declared its independence, or it called itself Macedonia, and the Greeks objected and said that they were the only ones that had the right to call themselves Macedonia, which is a region in northern Greece that's called Macedonia. So they changed their name to the former Yugoslav Republic of Macedonia. Now they call themselves North Macedonia. And so for the most part, the Greeks say that they are the real Macedonia and that Alexander and Philip were Greeks and spoke Greek, which is basically true, more or less. All right, and Soulbreaker says, POV, me trying to stop Alexander from getting sick. Spider-Man, it's a canon event. Soulbreaker says Alexander should have never invited Thrace. Really? Isn't Thrace where Bulgaria is? And then Soulbreaker says, fuck Rome. Frisk says, that troon Rick Perry says he's leaking your sext DMs with him, Warhammer. And Total Janny Depp says, I'm a hard man. Frisk says, I'm a hard N-word. Total Jenny says FR to life, or FR for life. Frisk says, hi Warhammer, it's Bubbles. I don't think you're Bubbles. Frisk says, how did you work it out? Frisk says, Bean said he's coming over to your house, Warhammer. Will you let him in? Dude, I always kind of thought that you were pretty dumb, I gotta say. Soulbreaker says, after we stopped hitting kids, all the education system went down. That's pretty brutal, dude. Total Janny Death, almost to the real chats, finally, LOL. Soulbreaker says, after Thrace fall, Greece fall as well. Total Janny Dev says, Tor's streaming would be even worse, TBH. Yes, it would be very much. All right. So that is my reading of life in ancient Greece. Known to the Greece has Halas. Frisk says, lame replies, you fell off, Warhammer. Yeah, well, I mean, I've been reading for like 2.5 hours. All right, next time I will do Ancient Rome. I will see you then. Actually, I might do Persia next. I'm not for sure. But yeah, we're getting close to the birth of Christ and the apostles now. So, thank you all for watching and have an excellent day. Peace.